My name's Gage, and if you told me a year ago that teaching my straight best friend how to cook would completely change my life, I would have laughed in your face. Not because Logan couldn't cook, because he genuinely couldn't. At 24, the guy somehow survived almost entirely on frozen pizza, protein bars, microwave burritos, and whatever his mom dropped off every Sunday in plastic containers labeled with masking tape. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. His entire nutrition plan depended on whether his mother remembered to season the chicken. The funny part? Logan wasn't lazy. He worked hard. Too hard, honestly. He'd graduated from college 2 years earlier, landed a decent engineering job, rented a small townhouse 20 minutes from mine, paid every bill on time, went to the gym 5 mornings a week, changed his own oil, fixed anything that broke. But if you handed him a raw onion and a knife, he'd stare at both like you'd asked him to solve nuclear fusion. I think vegetables know I'm afraid of them, he once told me. I think they do. They sense weakness. They absolutely do. He nodded seriously. I knew it. That was Logan, completely sincere about the dumbest things imaginable. We'd been friends for almost 3 years after meeting through mutual friends during a weekend hiking trip. Everyone else clicked because of sports or work. We clicked because we both got lost. The trail had been clearly marked. Neither of us noticed. 3 hours later, we stumbled back to the parking lot sunburned, dehydrated, and somehow laughing harder than everyone else combined. After that, we just kept hanging out. Movies, game nights, basketball, coffee after work, helping each other move furniture. The kind of friendship that slowly becomes routine without either person realizing it. There was just one tiny complication. I developed a crush. Not immediately. That would have been easier. Instead, it happened the dangerous way. Gradually. The more I learned about him, the harder it became not to notice everything. The way he always let elderly people go first through doors. How he'd stop conversations to help strangers whose groceries spilled in parking lots. How he apologized to chairs after bumping into them. Sorry, Logan. What? You apologized to furniture. It wasn't the chair's fault. No, I guess it wasn't. He shrugged. You never know. I never planned on telling him. Why would I? He was straight. Painfully, unquestionably straight. He talked about women openly. Asked for dating advice. Showed me Tinder disasters. Called me whenever relationships confused him. Which happened often. Why did she stop texting me? What happened? I told her I appreciated her communication efficiency. You what? I said she responds in complete sentences. I stared. That's flirting, right? No. I also complimented her spreadsheet. You complimented her spreadsheet. What spreadsheet? Vacation budget. Logan. What? You flirt like an accountant possessed by another accountant. He frowned thoughtfully. So that's bad. It depends. On. If you're trying to date Excel. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. That's the problem. He laughed at my jokes like they were actually funny. And every time he did, my stupid heart remembered. So I buried it. Because friendship was better than losing him. Simple enough. Then one Saturday afternoon, everything changed because Logan burned water. Actual water. He called me sounding genuinely stressed. Gage. What happened? I think my stove is broken. What's wrong with it? It keeps making smoke. What are you cooking? Water. Silence. Repeat that. I'm boiling water. Water doesn't smoke. Mine does. I drove over mostly because I assumed something electrical was on fire. Instead, I walked into complete chaos. Every window was open. The smoke detector was screaming. A black saucepan sat on the burner. Empty. Gage. Logan looked relieved. I think the water escaped. I looked inside the pan. Did you forget to put water in it? He blinked. Long pause. Oh, another pause. That would explain some things. I started laughing. Really laughing. The kind where your stomach hurts. Logan crossed his arms. You could be more supportive. I physically can't. My confidence is very fragile. You tried to boil an empty pan. I was distracted. I was watching a cooking video. I laughed even harder. Apparently, I skipped an important step. Apparently. He rubbed the back of his neck. I may need professional help. Therapy. Cooking lessons. I finally caught my breath. I cook. I know. You've eaten my food. I know. So. He looked at me hopefully. Teach me. I should have said no. Not because I didn't want to. Because spending even more time alone with the guy I secretly liked sounded like emotional self-destruction. Instead, when his face lit up. Seriously? Yeah. I'll buy groceries. I'll tell you what to buy. I'll probably buy the wrong thing. You definitely will. He grinned. This is going to be fun. I smiled back before I could stop myself. Yeah, that was the beginning. Every Thursday evening became cooking night. Rule number 1. No frozen food. Rule number 2. No microwaving entire meals. Rule number 3. If you accidentally poisoned us, I got to make fun of you forever. That's unfair. No. What if it's a tiny amount of poison? Especially then. The first lesson was spaghetti. Simple. Nearly impossible to ruin. Or so I believed. Okay, I said, placing ingredients on the counter. Pasta. He nodded seriously. Ground beef. Another nod. Tomatoes. He saluted. Garlic. He picked up an onion. This. No. He grabbed oregano. This. No. He held up dish soap. This. I stared. You know what garlic looks like. I've heard stories. I sighed dramatically. We're starting earlier than I thought. He laughed. I told you I'm hopeless. No. I handed him an actual garlic bulb. You're just aggressively inexperienced. That sounds slightly better. It is. The first 20 minutes involved identifying vegetables. I'm not joking. This is parsley. Looks leafy. It is leafy. This. Cilantro. Difference. Everything. They're both green. I rubbed my forehead. This is going to take months. You promised not to give up. I did. You shook on it. I remember. So legally you're trapped. I don't think that's how contracts work. It should be. Cooking itself turned out entertaining. Cut the onion. He immediately held the knife backwards. No. What? The other way. Oh. He switched hands. Better. Much. He chopped exactly one piece. Then looked offended. My eyes hurt. That's onions. Why? Science. I reject this science. 20 minutes later, the kitchen looked like a tornado had passed through. There was flour on the floor. Tomato sauce on the cabinet. A wooden spoon somehow resting on top of the refrigerator. Don't ask. Even Logan didn't know. But the pasta was actually edible. More than edible. Pretty good. He took one bite and stared at the plate. I made this. We made this. No. He shook his head. I actually contributed. You did. I've never contributed to food before. You definitely contributed. He looked strangely proud. Like he'd built something. I understand now. What? Why people cook? I smiled. Why? It feels. He searched for the word. Real. That answer surprised me. Because it wasn't about taste. Or saving money. Or impressing people. It was about creating something. I looked at him across the tiny kitchen. Hair messy from constantly running his hands through it. Tiny streak of tomato sauce near his jaw. Completely unaware. He caught me looking. What? You've got. I pointed. Sauce. He immediately wiped his forehead. No. My cheek. He wiped his ear. I laughed. Other side. After another failed attempt, I reached over. Hold still. My thumb brushed lightly against his cheek as I wiped away the sauce with a paper towel. Just 1 second. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. Friends do things like that. Still, something changed. Not in the room. Inside me. Because Logan didn't pull away. He just looked at me for a moment. Then smiled. Thanks. You're welcome. Neither of us said anything else. A second later, he looked back down at his plate. So, he twirled more pasta around his fork. Next Thursday. I should have been smarter. Instead, I heard myself answer without hesitation. Yeah. Next Thursday. By the fourth Thursday, Logan had stopped calling pasta noodles. Which, considering where we started, counted as serious progress. I've evolved, he announced proudly as I walked into his townhouse carrying a bag of groceries. You've learned vocabulary. Exactly. That's not evolution. It feels evolutionary. I laughed and set the bag on the counter. His kitchen already looked different. Not because he'd remodeled anything. Because it actually looked used. There was a wooden cutting board sitting on the counter instead of still wrapped in plastic. A bottle of olive oil stood next to the stove. 3 different spices sat neatly organized near the wall. None of them were dusty. You've been practicing. He tried and completely failed to hide his smile. Maybe. How many times? 5. I looked at him. 5. I got bored Sunday. So you just made spaghetti. And it wasn't terrible. You sound disappointed. I was hoping to have a dramatic disaster story. I'm actually proud of you. He scratched the back of his neck. My mom almost cried. What? I invited her over Monday. He opened the refrigerator and pulled out a container. She thought I'd ordered takeout. And then, I told her I cooked. I watched him grin at the memory. She kept asking if I hit my head. Reasonable question. I thought so too. That made me smile more than I expected. Because this wasn't just about recipes anymore. He was actually enjoying it. Okay, I said. Today we're making chicken stir-fry. He nodded confidently. I know vegetables now. We'll test that. I held up a bell pepper. Name. Pepper. Good. I grabbed broccoli. Broccoli. Excellent. A zucchini. Cucumber. So close. It betrayed me. It did. 20 minutes later, we had music playing through a small speaker while chopping vegetables. Or rather, I was chopping vegetables. Logan was negotiating with them. Stay still. I looked over. He was talking to a carrot. Logan, it keeps rolling. Because it's round. I don't appreciate its attitude. I shook my head. You have to hold it. I am holding it. Barely. It seems aggressive. It's a carrot. They can sense fear. You've transferred that theory from vegetables in general? I believe it's a conspiracy. He finally managed to cut it. The slice flew off the cutting board. We both watched it land on the floor. Logan sighed. It escaped. I'm beginning to think the produce section has a personal issue with you. I knew it. Cooking with Logan followed a predictable pattern. 20% actual instruction. 80% laughing. Which meant Thursday became my favorite day of the week. I try not to think too hard about why. Okay. I handed him the bottle of soy sauce. 2 tablespoons. He stared at the measuring spoons. Which one's a tablespoon? I pointed. Big one. He nodded. Then immediately picked the small one. No. This one looked confident. Kitchen confidence isn't a thing. It should be. Somehow, despite all the distractions, dinner turned out incredible. Logan took one bite and closed his eyes dramatically. I made restaurant food. You made edible food. No. He pointed at the plate. This is art. Let's not get carried away. I'm calling my mother. Before I could stop him, he actually grabbed his phone. Logan. What? You don't need to call your mom because broccoli tastes good. She deserves to know. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my fork. A few weeks later, Thursday became Friday. Not because we changed the schedule. Because Logan texted me Wednesday afternoon. Logan, can we move cooking night? Me, sure. Everything okay? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Logan, rough day at work. Me, Friday works. Logan, thanks. That simple conversation stayed with me longer than it should have. Friday evening, he opened the door looking exhausted. His usually neat hair was a mess. His shoulders slumped. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. You look terrible. Thank you. I mean it affectionately. I appreciate the emotional support. I stepped inside. What happened? He shrugged. Project deadlines. Bad boss. No. He sighed. Just everything at once. I knew that feeling. You don't have to cook tonight. He looked genuinely surprised. But it's Friday. So, we always cook. We can order pizza. He stared at me for a second, then smiled. You know what's weird? What? I was looking forward to this all week. I felt something warm settle quietly in my chest. Really? Yeah. He tossed his keys into a bowl near the door. Thursday or Friday now is the only evening where my brain actually turns off. I didn't know what to say, because I'd been feeling exactly the same thing. Instead, I smiled. Then let's make something easy. That night we cooked grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Hardly impressive, but somewhere between buttering bread and arguing about the perfect amount of cheese, Logan started laughing again. The tired expression slowly disappeared. By the time we finished eating, he looked like himself. Better? I asked. He leaned back in his chair. Much. Silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward. Just quiet. You know, he said eventually. I didn't realize how lonely I was. I looked up. What do you mean? He shrugged. I go to work. Come home. Heat up food. Watch something. Go to bed. Repeat. He looked around his kitchen. Now every week there's. He searched for the right word. Something. I understood immediately. Routine. Shared routine. Something to look forward to. I get that. He smiled. I figured you would. Around 2 months after our first lesson, Logan surprised me. He invited me over on a Tuesday. Not for cooking. Just dinner. I made something. His text said, don't laugh. I walked in expecting smoke. Or at least mild disaster. Instead, the table was actually set. Nothing fancy. Just 2 plates. 2 glasses. Candles. Logan. What? You lit candles. He looked confused. It got dark. I know. They help you see. I stared. Were they purely functional? Mostly. A pause. Maybe they looked nice too. I smiled. They do. Dinner was baked chicken with roasted vegetables. Perfectly cooked. Perfectly seasoned. I took one bite. Then another. This is... He leaned forward nervously. Good. Really good. His shoulders relaxed. I practiced. I can tell. I may have made this recipe 4 times. 4. The first one was dry. The second one was undercooked. The third one was edible. And this? He grinned. This one made my neighbor ask what smelled so good. I couldn't stop smiling. Because I remembered the guy who'd tried to boil an empty pan. Now he was roasting vegetables. Progress looked good on him. So, he rested his elbows on the table. I have a question. Shoot. When do I graduate? I laughed. Graduate? From cooking school. There isn't a graduation. There should be. What would you get? A tiny chef hat. No. A certificate. No. A golden spatula? I considered it. Maybe. I knew it. The weather cooled as autumn settled in. Cooking nights shifted naturally. Instead of opening windows, we kept them closed while warm food filled the kitchen with incredible smells. Instead of iced coffee, we drank tea afterward. Instead of sitting outside, we'd stay inside talking long after dinner ended. Sometimes about work. Sometimes about family. Sometimes about absolutely nothing. Those conversations became my favorite part. One Friday, we somehow ended up discussing childhood dreams. I wanted to be an astronaut. Logan admitted. Really? I was convinced. What happened? I learned math. I laughed. You? I wanted to own a bookstore. He looked surprised. I can actually picture that. Yeah. You always recommend books. I guess I do. He nodded. And you somehow remember what everyone likes. That caught me off guard. You noticed? You remember everything. He leaned back thoughtfully. You bought me that cookbook because I mentioned wanting one exactly once. I forgot I even said it. I didn't. His words lingered longer than they should have. Because I'd never realized he noticed things about me too. Not just the other way around. You notice a lot. I said quietly. He shrugged. About people I care about. My heart stumbled. Friends cared about each other. I reminded myself of that immediately. Still, something about the way he said it stayed with me. The next Friday, we decided to make homemade pizza. Big mistake. Flour somehow ended up everywhere. The counter. The floor. My shirt. His hair. I looked at him. How did flour get in your hair? I don't know. Were you baking with your head? I got enthusiastic. You attacked the dough. The dough attacked first. I laughed. You're impossible. So I've been told. He reached up absent-mindedly. What? Nothing. You've got. He tried brushing his own hair. No. The other side. He tried again. I sighed. Hold still. Just like the tomato sauce weeks earlier. I reached up and brushed flour from his hair. This time my hand lingered for barely a second longer. Not intentionally. Just long enough to notice he wasn't looking at the flour anymore. He was looking at me. Neither of us moved. The kitchen suddenly felt unusually quiet despite the music still playing. His expression changed slightly. Softer somehow. Almost thoughtful. Then the oven timer beeped. Both of us stepped back at exactly the same moment. Pizza, he said quickly. Right. I cleared my throat. Pizza. Neither of us mentioned those few strange seconds. But later that night, driving home alone, I realized something uncomfortable. Those little moments were happening more often. And I had absolutely no idea whether they meant anything. Or whether I was simply making the same mistake I'd promised myself never to make. The strange moments didn't stop. If anything, they became part of the rhythm we'd built without either of us acknowledging them. A glance that lasted a little too long. Standing slightly closer than necessary while chopping vegetables. Conversations that drifted later into the night because neither of us seemed eager to say goodbye. I told myself not to read into any of it. Logan was comfortable around me. That was all. Comfort wasn't attraction. It certainly wasn't love. So I kept reminding myself. Unfortunately, my heart wasn't particularly interested in logic. One Thursday afternoon, Logan called while I was still at work. Gage, you sound suspicious. I'm standing in a grocery store. Should I be worried? I forgot the shopping list. I smiled despite myself. I texted it to you. I know. I opened the message. Good. Then another notification appeared. And I forgot everything. I leaned back in my chair. Okay. What aisle are you in? I think vegetables. You think? There are green things. Helpful. I try. I spent the next 15 minutes guiding him through the store. No, that's lettuce. The tomatoes are behind you. Please don't buy cinnamon instead of paprika again. They look similar. They absolutely do not. An elderly woman passed him and apparently overheard part of the conversation. I only knew because Logan suddenly said, "She just laughed at me." Can you blame her? No. A pause. She says you're very patient. I laughed. Tell her thanks. I already did. Another pause. She says I should keep you. The words caught me completely off guard. What did you say? I said I'm trying. Silence. Not awkward. Just unexpected. Logan spoke again before I could answer. Okay. I found garlic. I'm proud of you. I almost bought onions. That's growth. It really is. When I arrived that evening, everything was already sitting neatly on the counter. Exactly what we needed. You bought everything correctly. I know. He looked absurdly proud. I only called you 6 times. It was 8. I rounded down. Today's lesson was homemade soup. Simple enough. Or so I believed. Okay. I handed him potatoes. Peel these. He stared at the peeler. I've never understood this tool. What part? All of it. You scrape. I feel like there's hidden technique. There isn't. There definitely is. 5 minutes later, he held up a potato roughly half its original size. I've removed too much. You've declared war on it. I panicked. It was a potato. It looked judgmental. I laughed so hard I had to put the knife down. You know, I finally managed. I've taught a lot of people random things. You have. My younger cousins. Friends. My sister. No one's ever argued with vegetables before. I'm bringing originality. You definitely are. He grinned. I try. About halfway through cooking, the power went out. The entire house went dark. Well, Logan looked around. That's inconvenient. I checked my phone. The whole neighborhood. Outside the windows, every nearby house had gone dark too. Rain tapped steadily against the glass. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. I have candles. Logan disappeared into a cabinet. A minute later, soft light filled the kitchen. It changed everything. The bright overhead lights disappeared. The room suddenly felt quieter. Smaller. Warmer. We can't finish dinner. He said. We can. I pointed toward the gas stove. You have gas. His eyes widened. You're right. I forgot fire still works. Humanity figured this out a while ago. Technology has made me soft. The soup simmered quietly while rain poured outside. Neither of us rushed. There wasn't any reason to. Without television. Without phones. Without bright lights. We just talked. Can I ask you something? Logan said eventually. Sure. You've never really talked about dating. My stomach tightened. What about it? He shrugged. I don't know. You give everyone else advice. But you never mention yourself. I carefully stirred the soup. There isn't much to mention. There has to be. Not really. He looked genuinely surprised. I find that hard to believe. Why? He frowned like the answer should have been obvious. Because you're. He stopped. I'm what? He looked down at the counter. Easy to be around. I smiled slightly. That's nice. I mean, he searched for better words. People trust you. They like talking to you. You remember things. You actually listen. He shrugged awkwardly. I don't know. I just assumed someone would have noticed. I stared at him for a second. If you're trying to make me feel better, I'm not. I mean it. Something about the sincerity in his voice made it unexpectedly difficult to answer. Thanks. He nodded once, then quietly changed the subject. The electricity came back halfway through dinner. Neither of us turned the lights back on. I kind of like this. Logan admitted. The candles. He nodded. It feels. He smiled sheepishly. Peaceful. I know what you mean. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. The soup turned out surprisingly good. I made soup. Logan said with genuine amazement. You did. I'm becoming powerful. I wouldn't go that far. I know multiple spices now. Dangerous knowledge. I can identify time. I raised an eyebrow. Can you? Mostly. The following week, Logan texted me something unusual. Logan, random question. Me, okay. Logan, favorite dessert? I frowned. Me, why? 3 dots. Then, Logan, just answer. Me, apple pie. Logan, noted. That was all. No explanation. Nothing. I assumed he'd forgotten to tell me whatever the real reason was. Saturday afternoon, he knocked on my apartment door, holding a pie. An unmistakably homemade pie. Logan. He looked suddenly nervous. I had today off. I found a recipe. My first one burned. The second one looked sad. This is number 3. I blinked. You made me pie? He shrugged. You said it was your favorite. I honestly didn't know what to say. No one had ever baked me anything before. At least not outside my family. You didn't have to do that. I know. I wanted to. That answer settled quietly somewhere deep inside me. I invited him in. The pie looked a little uneven. The crust leaned slightly to one side. There was more cinnamon than necessary. But after the first bite, this is incredible. His face immediately brightened. Really? Seriously? I would have guessed this was your 10th attempt. It was technically my 3rd. Still impressive. He laughed in obvious relief. I thought you'd hate it. I love it. For some reason, he looked almost happier hearing that than I'd expected. As autumn turned colder, our friendship somehow became even easier. Neither of us questioned why. If Logan stopped by after work just to talk for 20 minutes. Normal. If I texted him pictures whenever I found strange vegetables at grocery stores. Normal. If one of us had a rough day and instinctively called the other. Also normal. Our friends noticed before we did. Or maybe before I admitted it. We were all at our usual Saturday board game night when our friend Mason casually looked between us. You two spend an unhealthy amount of time together. Logan didn't even look up from the game board. We cook. You cook 3 nights a week now. Sometimes 4. Last Tuesday wasn't cooking. Mason pointed out. You just watch documentaries. Logan shrugged. Educational. Mason slowly smiled. Huh. What? Nothing. He looked suspiciously amused. Across the table, I suddenly found the game pieces incredibly interesting. Nothing else was said. But later, walking toward our cars, Logan frowned. Do we spend a weird amount of time together? I answered honestly. Probably. He considered it. I'm okay with that. My heart betrayed me immediately. Me too. He smiled. Good. Then he climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving me standing there wondering why such a simple conversation kept replaying in my head. A week later, something happened that caught both of us completely off guard. I caught the flu. Nothing serious. Just miserable. High fever. No energy. The kind where even making tea feels impossible. I texted Logan Thursday morning. Me. No cooking tonight. Logan, everything okay? Me, sick. His reply came almost instantly. Logan, need anything? Me, sleep. Logan, that's not something I can buy. Me, unfortunately. I fell asleep shortly afterward. Around 6 in the evening, my doorbell rang. I opened the door wearing sweatpants and looking exactly how I felt. Logan stood there holding 2 grocery bags. What are you doing? You taught me soup. He lifted one bag. So, I made soup. I stared at him. You made soup? I think. You think. I followed the recipe. I tasted it. I survived. I couldn't help smiling. You didn't have to come over. I know. He stepped inside. You would have done the same thing. The uncomfortable part. He was right. He unpacked everything into my kitchen. Soup, fresh bread, tea, fruit, medicine, even sports drinks. When did you? I called my mom. He admitted. She told me what sick people need. I laughed weakly. Smart. I have moments. He heated the soup while I sat at the kitchen table, too tired to argue. A few minutes later, he placed a bowl in front of me. There. Professional chef. I took one spoonful, then another. It tasted really good. Better than good. Comforting. You actually made this. I did. You've gotten good. He looked oddly pleased by that. You know? He sat across from me. I kept hearing your voice while I cooked. What? Don't rush. Taste before adding salt. Lower the heat. He smiled. It was surprisingly helpful. I looked down at the soup before answering. I'm glad. We spent the next hour talking quietly. Nothing important. He never once looked impatient. Never checked the time. When he finally stood to leave, he stopped near the door. Text me tomorrow. I will. If you're still sick. He hesitated. I can make more soup. I laughed softly. I'd like that. He smiled. So would I. After he left, I sat alone in my apartment, holding the still warm bowl. And for the first time since all of this started, I became genuinely afraid. Because whatever I felt for Logan wasn't getting smaller. It was growing. Quietly. Steadily. With every Thursday. Every conversation. Every shared meal. Every thoughtful thing he did without expecting anything in return. And I had absolutely no idea how much longer I could pretend it was just friendship. I got better after 4 days. Physically, anyway. Emotionally, That was becoming significantly more complicated. The problem wasn't that Logan had brought me soup. The problem was that after that, he started doing thoughtful things without realizing how impossible they were to ignore. If he stopped at the grocery store, he'd text me, "Need anything?" If he passed my favorite coffee shop on his way home, a latte somehow appeared at my apartment. When my car started making a strange noise, he showed up with his toolbox before I even had time to schedule an appointment. I can at least figure out what's wrong. You don't have to. I know. He crouched beside the front tire. I like helping. That sentence lingered in my head for hours afterward. Cooking nights continued exactly as before. Or at least we both pretended they did. Tonight's recipe was homemade ravioli. An ambitious choice. "Why are we making something this complicated?" Logan asked while staring suspiciously at the dough. "Because you're ready." "I don't think I am." "You made pie." "That was luck." "It wasn't." He sighed dramatically. "I miss soup." "Soup misses you too." He laughed. "I knew it." Making ravioli required teamwork. One person rolled the dough. The other prepared the filling. "Unfortunately, I think mine are different sizes," Logan admitted. I looked at the row he'd made. One ravioli was almost twice the size of the others. "That's ambitious." "I believe in variety." "You invented family-sized ravioli." "It deserves love too." We spent nearly 2 hours making them. Some looked professional. Others looked creative. They don't have to be perfect. I reminded him. "I know." He held one up proudly. "But I want them to be." I smiled. "You're becoming a perfectionist." "No." He looked at the crooked ravioli. "I've just started caring." That answer caught me off guard. "You really enjoy cooking now?" "I do." He looked around the kitchen. "It doesn't feel like learning anymore." "What does it feel like?" He answered immediately. "Us." The word slipped out naturally, without hesitation, without him seeming to realize he'd said it. "Us." My heart reacted instantly. Logan, apparently noticing my expression, frowned. "What?" "Nothing." "You made a face." "I did not." "You absolutely did." "I was thinking." "Dangerous." I laughed. "You've become funny." "I learned from the best." I looked away before he could notice the smile I couldn't quite hide. The following Saturday, our group planned a weekend trip to a nearby lake. Nothing fancy, just cabins, fishing, board games, campfires, the usual. Logan and I drove together because everyone assumed we would. No one even questioned it anymore. Halfway there, he glanced over. "You've been quiet." "Just tired." "Liar." I laughed. "You know me too well." "I do." He turned the radio down. "What's wrong?" I hesitated. Not because I wanted to tell him the truth. Because lying suddenly felt exhausting. "Work's been stressful." "Technically true." He nodded. "Mine too." Silence settled for a minute. Then he spoke again. "I'm glad we started cooking." I looked over. "Random." "I know. But..." He shrugged. "I don't think I realized how much I needed an actual hobby." "I thought the gym was your hobby." "It was." He smiled slightly. "But this feels different." "How?" "I make something. I share it. My mom calls asking what I cooked. My coworkers ask for recipes." He laughed quietly. "I have conversations now that aren't about engineering." I smiled. "I never thought about that." "You changed something." He said it so casually, like it was obvious. "You taught me." "No." He shook his head. "You changed part of my life." I looked out the window, because meeting his eyes suddenly felt dangerous. That evening, everyone gathered around a campfire. Someone brought marshmallows. Someone else brought guitars. Conversation drifted lazily beneath a sky full of stars. I was talking with Mason when I noticed Logan laughing across the fire with 2 women from another cabin. Nothing unusual. They seemed friendly. One of them touched his arm while laughing at something he'd said. Again, completely normal. Perfectly innocent. Still, something unpleasant settled quietly in my stomach. I looked away immediately. "You're being ridiculous." He's straight. He's allowed to talk to women. He's allowed to date women. What exactly did you expect? Gage. Mason's voice pulled me back. You disappeared." "No. You absolutely did." He looked across the fire. Then back at me. "Huh. What?" "Nothing." His expression became strangely thoughtful. I hated that expression. It usually meant he was figuring something out. Later that night, everyone slowly wandered back toward the cabins. Logan caught up beside me. "You vanished." "I was here." "You got quiet." "So did you." "No." He smiled. "I was making friends." "I noticed." He glanced at me. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah." "You sure?" "Of course." He studied me for another second, then nodded. If something's wrong. I know. I can tell you. I know. He smiled. Good. That should have ended the conversation. Instead, you know those women? I asked. He blinked. The sisters? Apparently. No. They just sat near us. Oh. Silence. Then Logan laughed. What? You sound like my mother. I do not. Who were those girls? He attempted a terrible imitation. I rolled my eyes. Forget I asked. I already have. He hadn't. I could tell. The next morning we decided to hike before everyone else woke up. The trail circled the lake. Cold autumn air filled the forest. Leaves crunched beneath our boots. You remember the first time we met? Logan asked. The world's easiest hiking trail? The one we got lost on. I remember. He laughed. I still can't believe everyone found us sitting beside the wrong lake. It was a very nice wrong lake. It really was. We walked quietly for several minutes. Then he spoke again. I've been thinking. About. Next month. My lease ends. I nodded. I remember. My landlord wants to increase rent. Yeah. He kicked a small stone off the path. I've been looking at apartments. Find anything? Not really. He hesitated. Then, I had an idea. Something in his tone made me glance over. What idea? He looked straight ahead. Maybe. Another pause. Maybe we should get a place together. I actually stopped walking. He took another 2 steps before realizing I'd frozen. What? I stared at him. Roommates. He nodded. Yeah. I mean. He shrugged awkwardly. We're together all the time anyway. You practically live at my place. I practically live at yours. We already cook together. It would save money. And? He smiled. I think it'd be fun. My heart was pounding so loudly I barely heard the birds anymore. Living together? With the man I'd spent months trying not to fall even harder for? That sounded like either the best idea imaginable or the worst. Gage. He looked concerned. You've gone completely silent. I searched desperately for words. I wasn't expecting that. Bad idea? No. Too quickly. He noticed immediately. So, he smiled carefully. Not a bad idea? I don't know. That was the most honest answer I had. He nodded slowly. You don't have to answer now. I know. Just, he looked down the trail. Think about it. I will. And I meant it. Unfortunately, thinking about it only made everything more confusing. A week passed. Then another. Neither of us mentioned the apartment again. But the idea refused to leave my head. One Thursday after dinner, Logan was unusually quiet. Finally, while washing dishes, he spoke. I found a place. I looked up. Oh, 2 bedrooms. Big kitchen. Reasonable rent. He smiled faintly. I didn't apply. You didn't. He shook his head. I wanted to ask you first. My chest tightened. You were serious? I was. He dried another plate. I still am. I watched him for several seconds. Why me? He looked genuinely surprised by the question. Who else would I ask? I don't know. My coworkers? He laughed. I barely know them. My cousin. He'd never clean. He looked back at me. Gage. His voice softened. You're my favorite person to spend time with. The kitchen suddenly felt very, very quiet. He continued before I could respond. I trust you. We already know we live the same way. You've become. He smiled almost sheepishly. My home, I guess. The plate slipped slightly in my hands. I caught it before it hit the sink. He didn't seem to notice. I wished I hadn't noticed either. Because no matter how innocent he meant those words, they landed directly in the part of me I'd been trying so desperately to protect. That night, I lay awake staring at my ceiling. One thought repeated over and over. If I moved in with Logan, there would be absolutely nowhere left to hide my feelings. And I was beginning to fear that he might notice them long before I found the courage to admit the truth to myself or to him. For the next 2 weeks, I avoided answering. Not because I wanted to, because every possible answer felt dangerous. If I said no, I'd hurt Logan. If I said yes, I'd be living with the man I was hopelessly in love with. Neither option seemed particularly healthy. Apparently, Logan noticed my hesitation. He just never pressured me, which somehow made the decision even harder. One Thursday, we weren't cooking. We'd finished dinner early and were sitting on his back porch with mugs of hot tea. The evening air had turned cold enough that we both wore hoodies. You've been thinking, Logan said. I have. He nodded. I'm sorry. For what? I kind of dropped the apartment idea on you. You did. I should have asked differently. I looked over. You don't have to apologize. I know. He smiled faintly. I just don't want you to think I'm expecting anything. I don't. Silence settled between us. You know? He stared into his mug. I haven't really lived with anyone since college. Neither have I. I hated having random roommates. So did I. They left dishes everywhere. I laughed. They always do. You never leave dishes. I've trained you well. You definitely have. He smiled. That's part of why I asked. I waited. I already know we'd be okay. His certainty made my chest tighten. He'd already imagined it. Thought it through. Picture by picture. Meanwhile, I'd spent 2 weeks imagining entirely different complications. That Saturday, I visited my older sister, Emma. She knew me well enough to notice something was wrong before I even took my coat off. What's going on? What makes you think something's going on? You've reorganized the sugar packets 3 times. I looked down. Apparently, I had. Good observation. I've known you for 28 years. She handed me a mug of coffee. Talk. I couldn't tell her the whole truth. Not yet. So I settled for part of it. My best friend asked me to move in. She smiled immediately. That sounds exciting. It should. But, I sighed. What if it changes things? She thought about that. It will. See, everything changes things. She shrugged. Moving. New jobs. Relationships. Nothing stays exactly the same. That isn't helping. I know. She smiled sympathetically. But it's true. I stared into my coffee. What if I lose the friendship? She became quieter. Do you think living together would ruin it? I don't know. She leaned back. Then don't make the decision based on fear. I frowned. Make it based on whether you genuinely want to share your life with that person. Her words followed me all the way home. Share your life. That was exactly the problem. Because I already wanted far more than I should. A few days later, Logan called while I was driving home. You busy? Just driving. Good. I have an emergency. I laughed. What happened? I accidentally bought too many mushrooms. That's your emergency? There are a lot of mushrooms. How many? Enough. That's not a number. I panicked. You bought mushrooms? They were on sale. I shook my head. I'm coming over. I hoped you'd say that. When I arrived, he opened the refrigerator. I blinked. Logan. I know. There had to be at least 15 containers of mushrooms. Why? I forgot I'd already put some in the cart. Multiple times? Maybe. I started laughing. He crossed his arms. I expected more support. You've created a mushroom economy. I need help. We're making risotto. Can risotto use all these? No. What about soup? Also no. He sighed dramatically. I've ruined everything. No. I grinned. You've just guaranteed we'll eat mushrooms for a week. He looked genuinely relieved. That's manageable. Cooking together felt as easy as breathing now. Neither of us needed instructions very often. Logan reached for ingredients before I asked. I knew exactly where he'd started keeping everything in his kitchen. Without realizing it, we'd developed dozens of tiny habits. He always chopped onions. I always handled seasoning. He stirred sauces. I tasted them. He cleaned while I plated dinner. None of it had ever been discussed. It had simply happened. Somewhere along the way, we'd become a team. Halfway through dinner, Logan looked unusually thoughtful. I talked to my mom. How's she doing? Good. He smiled. She asked about you. Me? I told her you were helping me survive adulthood. I appreciate the promotion. He laughed. She wants you to come over for dinner sometime. I blinked. Really? She keeps saying she needs to thank you. You don't need to thank me. I told her that. He shrugged. She ignored me. I can believe that. So, he looked hopeful. Would you? I'd like that. His smile appeared so quickly that I almost forgot to answer. Great. Fair warning. What? She asks approximately 900 questions. I'll prepare myself. You can't. The following Sunday, I met Logan's parents for the first time in months. I'd met them briefly before. Birthday parties. Graduation. Nothing personal. This felt different. His mother hugged me the second I walked through the door. Gage. It's so good to see you. You too. She stepped back. My son says you've turned him into a functional adult. I don't think I deserve that much credit. Oh, you absolutely do. From somewhere behind us, Logan groaned. Mom. What? I still exist. Barely. She smiled at me. He called me because he couldn't identify parsley. I remember. I thought it was cilantro. His father looked up from the grill. To be fair, they do look similar. Thank you. Logan said triumphantly. I've been vindicated. His mother rolled her eyes. You've been tolerated. The entire afternoon passed effortlessly. His parents teased him constantly. He teased them right back. It was loud, comfortable, warm. Exactly the kind of family dinner I'd always loved. At one point, while Logan helped his dad outside, his mother quietly sat beside me. So, she smiled knowingly. He's happier. I looked toward the backyard. He seems happy. He is. She lowered her voice slightly. I haven't seen him this relaxed in years. I wasn't sure what to say. She continued. He talks about you all the time. My heart skipped. He does. Oh, constantly. Gage showed me this recipe. Gage recommended this book. Gage says this pan works better. She laughed softly. I almost feel like I know you already. Heat crept into my face. I didn't realize. He probably doesn't either. She smiled kindly. But you've become important to him. Before I could respond, Logan returned carrying another plate. What are you two talking about? His mother smiled innocently. Recipes. He looked suspicious. I don't believe either of you. You shouldn't. She answered immediately. Driving home that evening, Logan looked unusually quiet. You okay? I asked. He nodded. Yeah. A pause. My mom likes you. I noticed. She doesn't invite people over very often. Oh, I thought you should know. I smiled. Tell her thanks. I don't have to. He glanced over. She'll probably text you herself. I laughed. Your family really adopted me. They kind of did. Another comfortable silence filled the truck. Then, almost absent-mindedly, Logan said, You fit. What? With us. He kept his eyes on the road. I don't know. It just feels natural. I looked out the window before he could see my expression. Natural. That word should have made me happy. Instead, it hurt. Because for me, nothing about this felt simple anymore. 3 days later, my phone buzzed just after lunch. Logan, apartments still available. I stared at the message for a long time. Then typed. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted again. Finally. Me. Want to look at it this weekend? His reply appeared almost instantly. Logan, seriously? Me, just looking. 3 dots. Then. Logan, that's all I wanted. Saturday morning arrived far too quickly. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a quiet building overlooking a small park. The leasing agent unlocked the door. The moment we stepped inside, Logan stopped walking. Wow. Natural light filled the living room. The kitchen was twice the size of either of ours. There was enough counter space for 3 people to cook comfortably. Logan immediately walked over to the kitchen island. Gage. I joined him. What? He rested both hands on the counter. We could make literally anything in here. I laughed. That's your first thought? Obviously. The leasing agent smiled politely and continued explaining the apartment. I barely heard a word. Instead, I watched Logan. He wandered from room to room with quiet excitement. This bedroom gets morning sun. The pantry's huge. Look, there's even space for your bookshelf. Your bookshelf. Not a bookshelf. Mine. Without thinking, he'd already started imagining us living there. By the time we reached the balcony, he'd fallen completely silent. What? I asked. He looked out over the park. I can picture it. My pulse quickened. Picture what? He smiled. Coming home. He looked back at me. Cooking. Watching movies. Complaining about work. Just. He shrugged. Living. There was something so open about the way he said it that my carefully built emotional defenses cracked just a little. For one dangerous second, I almost told him everything. Instead, I forced a smile. It is a nice apartment. He studied my face. You still look scared. I laughed weakly. Do I? A little. He looked genuinely concerned. If you don't want this, I won't be upset. I promise. That was the problem. He'd never make me choose. Which meant the choice was entirely mine. And standing there on that balcony, watching the person I loved imagine a future that looked so wonderfully ordinary, I realized I wanted that future too. Even if it meant risking my heart every single day. The apartment stayed on my mind all week. Not because of the rent. Not because of the location. Because of the way Logan had looked standing in that kitchen. Like he'd already found somewhere he belonged. And somehow, he'd pictured me there too. Thursday arrived. For the first time in months, neither of us mentioned recipes. We simply stood in his kitchen looking at each other. So, Logan finally said. So, he rubbed the back of his neck. Have you decided? I took a slow breath. Yeah. He waited. If you're still sure, I'd like to move in. For a split second, he just stared at me. Then a huge grin spread across his face. Seriously? Seriously. He laughed. Actually laughed. I was trying so hard not to get my hopes up. I noticed. I failed. You definitely failed. He walked into the living room and immediately grabbed his phone. What are you doing? Calling the leasing office. Right now? They close in 40 minutes. I laughed. You've thought about this a lot. I really have. 2 weeks later, we were surrounded by cardboard boxes. Neither of us owned much furniture. But somehow, moving still felt endless. Why do you have so many books? Logan asked while carrying another box inside. They multiply. I'm starting to believe you. You own 6 frying pans. They all have different jobs. They're pans. They have personalities. I smiled. You've changed. You taught me. He carefully placed the box beside the bookshelf. You created this monster. I accept responsibility. By evening, the apartment looked almost livable. The couch was assembled. The kitchen was organized. My books filled one wall. His collection of cookbooks occupied an entire shelf. He stepped back to admire them. I own cookbooks. You do. I still can't believe that. I still can't believe you voluntarily bought a pasta machine. He looked offended. It's useful. You've used it once. It has emotional value. Our first dinner in the apartment wasn't anything complicated. We made grilled chicken, roasted potatoes, and salad. Simple, comfortable, familiar. Halfway through the meal, Logan looked around the apartment. This feels weird. Good weird. The best kind. He smiled. I keep forgetting this is actually our place. Our place. The words sounded surprisingly natural. I know. He raised his glass. To roommates. I lifted mine. To roommates. Our glasses clinked softly. Something about that tiny moment felt strangely important. Living together turned out to be ridiculously easy. Almost suspiciously easy. Within a week, we'd settled into routines neither of us had planned. Logan woke up earlier. He always started coffee before leaving for work. I usually made breakfast on weekends. He handled laundry without being asked. I watered the plants we'd somehow ended up buying together. Every evening, one of us inevitably asked, "So, what are we cooking?" Sometimes we'd try ambitious recipes. Sometimes we'd throw together sandwiches after exhausting workdays. It didn't matter. Dinner became the part of the day we both looked forward to. 3 weeks after moving in, I came home unusually late. Traffic had been terrible. Work had been worse. When I finally unlocked the apartment door, the smell hit me first. Fresh bread, garlic, tomato sauce. I stepped inside. Logan looked up from the stove. There you are. You cooked. You looked exhausted this morning. He shrugged. So I figured I'd handle dinner. I loosened my tie. You didn't have to. I know. He smiled. But I wanted to. Those words again. Always those words. Dinner was incredible. Fresh pasta. Homemade sauce. Garlic bread that somehow tasted better than anything we'd ever made together. You've officially surpassed the teacher. I admitted. His eyes widened. No. You have. I disagree. I'm serious. He laughed quietly. You know, I've been waiting months to hear you admit that. I regret everything. You should. Life settled into something wonderfully ordinary. Sunday mornings meant grocery shopping. Wednesday evenings meant cleaning. Fridays usually meant movie nights. We never planned those traditions. They simply appeared. One Friday, we fell asleep halfway through a documentary. I woke up around 2 in the morning. The television was still quietly playing. Logan was asleep in the armchair across from me. The apartment was completely silent. For a long moment, I simply watched him. He looked peaceful, content, happy. And for the 100th time, I wondered what life would have looked like if I'd never taken that first grocery bag into his kitchen. I turned off the television. As I walked past his chair, he stirred awake. Movie over? Hours ago. He blinked sleepily. Oh. He looked around. I fell asleep. You did. He stood slowly. Good night. Night. We each disappeared into our separate bedrooms. Sometimes, the ordinary moments hurt the most, because they already felt like the life I'd secretly wanted. A month after moving in, our friends came over for dinner. Mason walked into the kitchen and immediately looked around. This place actually smells amazing. Logan looked smug. We made lasagna. I don't believe either of you. You shouldn't. I answered. Mason laughed. You two are officially domestic. Logan blinked. What does that mean? It means. Mason gestured toward the apartment. You finish each other's grocery lists. You own matching oven mitts. You argue about olive oil brands. Logan frowned. Those are important discussions. Mason looked at me. See, I couldn't help smiling. Later that evening, while everyone else was arguing over a board game, Mason quietly joined me on the balcony. So, he said, so, I want to ask you something. My stomach tightened immediately. What? He looked toward the living room, where Logan was laughing at something one of our friends had said. Are you ever planning to tell him? Every muscle in my body froze. Tell him what? Mason sighed. Gage, I've known you for 3 years. I know that look. My pulse quickened. You? I don't know what you're talking about. You really want to pretend? I stayed silent. He looked almost sympathetic. You love him. Not a question. A statement. I looked down at the balcony railing. I've never said that. You didn't have to. Silence stretched between us. Finally, I can't. I said quietly. Why not? Because he's straight. Mason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned against the railing. Maybe. Maybe. He is. I answered for him. I know. I've always known. Mason nodded slowly. Then what are you going to do? I laughed without humor. Nothing. You can do that. I have to. He studied my face for a long moment. I've never seen you this scared. I've never had this much to lose. That answer seemed to stop him. After another minute, he quietly said, I won't push. Thanks. But, he smiled sadly. I hope you're wrong. About what? About what Logan feels. I looked toward the living room. Logan glanced outside at exactly that moment. The second he saw me, he smiled. That familiar, effortless smile he'd given me hundreds of times. Then he pointed toward the kitchen, apparently asking whether we should start dessert. I smiled back and nodded. Mason watched the exchange without saying a word. December arrived. The apartment gradually filled with small holiday decorations. Not because either of us particularly cared, because Logan had walked through a store one afternoon and impulsively bought lights. They were on sale. He insisted. They're crooked, I said while helping him hang them. They have character. That's your excuse for everything. It works surprisingly often. We spent the evening decorating the living room. Music played quietly in the background. Snow drifted outside the windows. For the first time since moving in, everything felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. As we finished hanging the last strand of lights, Logan stepped back. We did a good job. We did. He looked around the apartment, then quietly said, I'm really glad you said yes. I looked at him. So am I. He smiled. You know, this already feels like home. Home. That word again. I smiled because I couldn't trust myself to say anything else. The truth was, it felt like home to me too. And that terrified me more with every passing day. Because I was beginning to realize something I hadn't wanted to admit. Living together wasn't making my feelings fade. It was making them impossible to hide. And sooner or later, something was going to change. Something changed the week before Christmas. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough that I couldn't convince myself I was imagining it anymore. It started with the smallest things. Logan waited for me before eating dinner, even if I got home late. If one of us had to work on Saturday, the other somehow delayed grocery shopping until we could go together. He'd knock on my bedroom door before leaving for work. I'm heading out. See you tonight. It wasn't necessary, but he did it every morning. And every evening, when I heard his key in the front door, I caught myself smiling before I even realized I was doing it. One Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Logan, running late. Me, everything okay? A few minutes passed. Logan, boss added another meeting. Me, I'll start dinner. His reply came immediately. Logan, thanks. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. Without thinking, I bought ingredients for his favorite mushroom risotto. Halfway through chopping onions, I suddenly laughed. 6 months ago, Logan couldn't identify parsley. Now I knew his favorite comfort food. Life was strange. He didn't get home until almost 8. The moment he walked through the door, he stopped. Is that risotto? It is. He looked exhausted. His tie was crooked. His hair looked like he'd run his hand through it 20 times. You made my favorite. I figured you needed it. He smiled in that quiet way he only smiled when he was genuinely touched. I did. Dinner was quieter than usual. Not uncomfortable. Just tired. After we finished eating, Logan leaned back in his chair. I forgot how bad some weeks can be. You've been working too much. I know. You should take a day off. He laughed. I've got deadlines. You always have deadlines. So do you. True. He looked at me for a second. You worry. What? You worry about everyone. I don't. You do. I've watched you do it for months. I shrugged. I guess. He smiled. I like that about you. Before I could answer, He stood up and started clearing the table. The conversation moved on. Mine didn't. Friday evening brought our annual holiday party with friends. Everyone gathered at Mason's apartment. There was too much food, too many board games, the usual friendly arguments over rules. At one point, Logan disappeared into the kitchen to help refill drinks. Emma, who had also been invited through mutual friends, quietly sat beside me. "So," she smiled. "How's the roommate situation?" "Good. Just good." I laughed. "It's really good." She studied my face. "But," I sighed. "There isn't a but. There never isn't." I looked across the room. Logan was laughing at something Mason had said. He looked over, caught me watching him, and smiled automatically before turning back to the conversation. Emma noticed. "Oh, what?" She looked at me carefully. "You've fallen even harder." I didn't answer. She didn't need one. Later that evening, everyone exchanged small Christmas gifts. Nothing expensive. Mostly jokes. Books. Coffee. Homemade cookies. Logan handed me a neatly wrapped box. "Open yours." I frowned. I thought we agreed on €20 gifts. We did. I unwrapped the paper. Inside was a chef's knife. Not flashy. Not expensive looking. Just beautifully made. I stared at it. "Logan, you keep borrowing mine." He said it casually. "So I figured you should have one that's actually yours." I ran my thumb carefully along the handle. It fit perfectly in my hand. "This is really thoughtful." He shrugged. "I asked the guy at the kitchen store approximately 400 questions. I believe that." He looked relieved when I finally left. I laughed, then handed him my gift. A leather-bound notebook. Blank pages. He looked confused. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside the cover, I'd written one sentence. "Recipes worth making again." He looked at the first page. I'd copied the recipe for spaghetti. The very first meal we'd ever made together. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he quietly closed the notebook. "I love it. Really, it's my favorite gift." Something in his voice made my chest tighten. Christmas Eve arrived a few days later. Neither of us had family obligations until the next morning. So we stayed home, cooked dinner, watched an old holiday movie. Snow drifted outside all evening. Around 10 o'clock, the power flickered once, then stabilized. Logan laughed. "Not soup again." I was thinking the same thing. He smiled. "I still remember that night." "So do I." Silence settled over the apartment. Comfortable. Warm. Eventually, he muted the television. "I've been thinking." That sentence immediately made me nervous. "About us." My heartbeat stumbled. "What about us?" He looked down at his mug. "You ever think it's weird?" I forced myself to stay calm. "What is?" "How fast all this happened." I frowned. "The cooking. Everything." He gestured around the apartment. "A year ago, I lived alone. I couldn't cook. I mostly worked. Now," he smiled faintly, "I can't imagine coming home and you not being here." Every instinct I had told me to stay quiet, to let him continue. He did. "I don't really know when you became." He searched for the words. "The first person I want to tell things to." I swallowed. "Logan." He laughed softly. "I know. It sounds dramatic." "No, it doesn't." He looked at me. "You've changed my life." There it was again. Those impossible words, spoken with complete sincerity, without realizing what they were doing to me. I looked away. "I think you've changed mine too." He smiled. "I'm glad." The next morning, we drove separately to spend Christmas with our families. Emma cornered me within 10 minutes of arriving. "Okay." She folded her arms. "What happened?" "Nothing." She raised an eyebrow. "You have that face." "What face?" "The one where you're thinking too much." I laughed weakly. He said something. "What?" I repeated the conversation as accurately as I could. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she stayed quiet for several seconds. Then, "Gage." "What? Has he ever actually told you he's straight?" I blinked. "No. You assumed. He dated women." So, so, I stopped. Because suddenly I realized something. Everything I knew about Logan came from observation, not from conversations. He'd gone on a few dates over the years. None had lasted. He'd never once talked about wanting a girlfriend, or a wife, or a future with anyone. I'd simply filled in the blanks. Emma watched my expression change. "I see the wheels turning. I've made assumptions." "You might have. I also might be completely wrong." "You might." She smiled gently. "But those are two different things." That evening, after family dinners ended, I drove back to the apartment. The living room lights were already on. Logan had beaten me home. The moment I stepped inside, he looked up from the couch. Hey, hey, how was your family? Good. Yours? The usual. He smiled. My mom sent leftovers. Emma did too. We're eating well this week. We definitely are. I set my bag down. The apartment felt strangely quiet after a day full of relatives. Neither of us seemed eager to interrupt it. Finally, Logan stood. I almost forgot. He disappeared into the hallway, then returned holding a small envelope. I found this while unpacking old boxes. He handed it to me. Inside was a photograph. I laughed immediately. The hiking trip. 3 years earlier. Two exhausted strangers, covered in dirt, standing beside the wrong lake after getting completely lost. Logan looked over my shoulder. I still can't believe that's how we met. Neither can I. He smiled. I'm really glad we got lost. I looked at the photograph again. So am I. He didn't move away. Neither did I. For several quiet seconds, we simply stood there looking at the picture. Then I became aware of something. We were standing very close. Close enough that if either of us shifted even slightly, the distance between us would disappear. Slowly, I looked up. Logan was already looking at me. He didn't seem surprised or uncomfortable. He just stayed there. His expression was thoughtful, almost uncertain, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. The silence stretched. Neither of us looked away. Then, quietly, Gage. Yeah. He hesitated, then gave the smallest shake of his head. Never mind. He smiled instead. Good night. Before I could answer, he walked toward his bedroom, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, still holding the old photograph. For the first time since we'd met, it wasn't just me wondering what that silence had meant. I was almost certain Logan had been wondering too. I barely slept that night. Not because of what Logan had said, because of what he hadn't. For the first time in nearly a year, it felt like we were both standing on opposite sides of the same conversation. Neither of us knew how to begin it. The week between Christmas and New Year's always felt strange. Work slowed down. The apartment building grew quieter. People disappeared to visit family. Logan and I somehow ended up spending even more time together than usual. One afternoon, we reorganized the kitchen simply because we were bored. Why do we own 4 wooden spoons? Logan asked. Because you insisted they all did different things. He looked at them. I was right. You absolutely weren't. They have different personalities. I laughed. You're quoting me. I learned from the best. That answer still made me smile every single time. On New Year's Eve, our friends hosted another small gathering. Nothing fancy, just dinner, music, and too many desserts. Around 11:30, everyone wandered outside to watch the fireworks from the hill behind Mason's house. Cold air stung my face. Snow crunched beneath our boots. The city lights stretched below us. Logan stood beside me with his hands in his jacket pockets. Pretty good view. The best one. I answered. He nodded. For a while, we simply watched people talking around us. Then he quietly asked, Can I ask you something? Always. He hesitated. You've seemed nervous lately. There it was. The conversation I'd been avoiding for months. I have. You have. He looked at me carefully. Did I do something? No. Are you sure? Positive. Then what is it? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because there wasn't a version of the truth that didn't risk everything. Before I could continue, people around us started counting. 10. 9. The moment disappeared. Fireworks exploded above the city as everyone shouted, Happy New Year. Friends hugged one another. People laughed. Someone opened sparkling cider. I turned toward Logan. Happy New Year. He smiled. You too. For one brief second, neither of us moved. Then he stepped forward and hugged me. Nothing unusual. We'd hugged before. Birthdays. Graduations. Big moments. But this time he held on just a little longer than usual. When we stepped apart, he looked like he wanted to say something again. Instead, he smiled. There, he said. Now it's officially a new year. 3 days later, everything changed. Not because of some grand romantic moment. Because of a Tuesday. An ordinary Tuesday. I came home early. The apartment was quiet. Logan's truck was already outside. Logan. In here. He was sitting at the kitchen table. Not cooking. Not reading. Just sitting. You okay? He looked up. We need to talk. Every possible terrible scenario flashed through my mind. What happened? He took a slow breath. I've been trying to figure something out. I sat across from him. Okay. You know that night. Which one? Christmas. When I almost said something. I nodded. I remember. I almost asked you a question. Silence. What question? He looked down at his hands, then back at me. I wanted to ask if I was imagining things. My heart started pounding. Imagining what? He smiled nervously. The way you look at me sometimes. I couldn't breathe. He continued before I had the chance to answer. I noticed months ago. I told myself I was making it up. Then I stopped believing that. I stared at him, unable to say a single word. And then, he laughed quietly. I realized something even more confusing. What? I started wondering why I kept hoping I wasn't imagining it. The room became impossibly quiet. I've never had to think about any of this before. He admitted. I dated women because. He shrugged helplessly. That's just what I assumed my life would look like. I never questioned it. He smiled sadly. Then you showed up with groceries. Despite everything, I laughed. You burned a pan. I did. I was very talented. You were. He looked at me for a long moment. You became my best friend. My favorite person. The first person I wanted to call. The person I wanted to come home to. His voice had become quieter now. And somewhere along the way, I stopped knowing where friendship ended. My eyes stung. Not because I was sad. Because I had imagined this conversation 1,000 times. It had never sounded like this. Gage. He said softly. I don't know exactly what this means. I've never done this before. But, he smiled nervously. I know I don't want to spend my life pretending I don't feel it. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who had once been afraid of carrots. Who now made homemade pasta from scratch. Who remembered my favorite pie. Who brought soup when I was sick. Who had unknowingly become the center of my everyday life. There wasn't anything left to hide. I love you. The words escaped before fear could stop them. The silence afterward lasted only a heartbeat. Then Logan smiled. Not surprised. Not shocked. Just relieved. I was really hoping that's what you'd say. I laughed through the emotion that had suddenly become impossible to hold back. You knew? I hoped. He corrected gently. There's a difference. I nodded. There is. Neither of us moved for another second. Then he stepped around the table. He stopped close enough that either of us could still change our minds. I think, he said quietly, I'd like to kiss you. I smiled. I'd like that too. So we kissed. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't movie music. No fireworks. No audience. Just two people standing in the kitchen where everything had started almost a year earlier. When we finally stepped back, Logan laughed first. Wow. What? I spent months wondering if you liked me. I blinked. You? I thought you were completely out of my league. I stared at him. Logan. What? I've been in love with you since before the first spaghetti. His eyes widened. Seriously? Seriously. He covered his face with one hand. We are unbelievably bad at communication. I couldn't stop laughing. Apparently, the next several weeks weren't perfect. There were awkward conversations, questions, uncertainty, both of us learning what this new chapter looked like. But one thing never changed. Thursday. Every Thursday, we still cooked together. Sometimes complicated recipes. Sometimes grilled cheese. Sometimes soup. One evening, while making spaghetti for the first time in almost a year, Logan smiled at me across the kitchen. You know? What? If I hadn't burned that pan, you would have eventually. I mean, he laughed. If I hadn't been such a disaster in the kitchen, I finished stirring the sauce. You would have found another excuse. He looked curious. What makes you think that? I smiled. Because I was already looking for reasons to spend more time with you. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the pasta. I can't believe I didn't notice. You were distracted. By vegetables. They were intimidating. They really were. Spring arrived sooner than either of us expected. One Saturday morning we walked through the neighborhood farmer's market carrying reusable grocery bags. Logan stopped in front of a produce stand. He picked up a zucchini. What is this? I stared at him. No. What? You know exactly what that is. He grinned. I just wanted to make sure you were paying attention. I rolled my eyes. You are impossible. But you still like teaching me. I do. He reached for my hand. Our fingers intertwined naturally, comfortably, like they'd always belonged there. I don't think I'll ever stop learning. He said. You won't. Good. We continued walking through the market, arguing about herbs, laughing over recipes, planning dinner. Just two ordinary people buying groceries. Exactly where our story had begun. Only this time, neither of us had to wonder what the other was feeling. And somehow, after everything, that ordinary future turned out to be the happiest ending either of us could have imagined.